Hello, everyone. This is Chantel Krish, and we're excited to welcome you all to the webinar this evening. We are just going to wait 1 to 2 minutes until everyone joins us, and then we will get started. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Coalition of Childcare Advocates BC's 2022 Roadmap to $10 a day here in British Columbia. I want to welcome British Columbians from across the province. I've been told we have almost 500 people registered for this evening's event, and we are just so excited to welcome you here tonight. And I know I am personally excited to learn more about how this will all roll out in the coming years to come. Like I said, my name is Chantel Krish, and I have the privilege and honor of being CEO of KidSafe Project Society here in Vancouver. I am also a mother of 2 young children and have previously worked at organizations like the YWCA Metro Vancouver, where we've advocated long and hard for $10 a day universal childcare. And so I'm just really honored to be able to hold this space, share it with all of you. And I want to thank the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, BC branch specifically, to Shannon Dobin and Mira Mears for helping us with the wonderful world of tech support and tech help this evening. I know it's going to be a smooth success because of their help and expertise, and I'm personally grateful. So thank you for that. I will do some housekeeping in just a moment, but before I do, I'd like to introduce Nadine Gagne with our recognition and respect for Indigenous rights and jurisdiction. Nadine is a Métis Early Years Program Coordinator with the Métis Nation. Her focus and passion is on supporting vulnerable Aboriginal children and families and bringing awareness and increased services to the disproportionate number of Aboriginal children in care in the Ministry of Children and Family Development Care. She's also creates beautiful Aboriginal music and culture and language resources for Aboriginal children and communities. And I believe Sharon Gregson will be sharing a link to a highly acclaimed music video that I personally can't wait to watch after this webinar. So Nadine, over to you to take the space. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to Sharon for always being so gracious to invite me to be a part of these discussions that are happening here tonight. And I just hold my hands up to everyone who I'm just surprised to hear the number of people that are logged on tonight to move forward in these important discussions about what's happening with childcare in BC. But before we get started, I just wanted to start us off in a good way and acknowledge, in the spirit of reconciliation, the traditional unceded territories of the Indigenous peoples that we are all calling in from today. I am very grateful to live and reside on in West Bank, on West Bank First Nations territory here in the Okanagan. It's so beautiful, and just wanted to acknowledge also all the work that has been done over decades now to move the childcare piece forward for families. I know I am a mother, a single mom of 3 children, my youngest being 2 years old. I've worked in Indigenous early childhood for 25 years and just know how much the pandemic has impacted families. And I think now more than ever, we need our villages back for our children. So many families have been isolated, but I know the cost of living is going up, rent, mortgages, food costs, the one thing that can help support families as we find our way forward together is childcare. So I'm excited to listen to all the things that are happening, and I just hold my hands up to Sharon and all of the people that have been working tirelessly to ensure that our children are not forgotten and that the government follows through in all the promises that we need to do for our children and our families. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and we're so grateful to have you here. Um, before we move on, I do just want to address a couple of housekeeping details here. So we will be having a couple of speakers this evening. And as always, for many of us who are accustomed to using Zoom and other video chats, video functions these days, there is a wonderful chat function here in Zoom, and we encourage you to use it. And so Linnell and Rita and Friends of the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC will be engaged in that discussion actively, answering questions. But there also is a Q&A function. So if you look at the bottom of your screen next to the participant list and the chat function, you'll see Q&A, and that's where you can actually post questions very specifically either to one of the speakers, and we will pick those up towards the end of the event. We will be recording this session as well, and so we just want to, of course, alert everybody that the session will be recorded. We will save the chats and the questions as well, so that'll inform our advocacy work moving forward. These discussions are so helpful for us as we can really understand what the issues and the concerns and the ideas are from all of you that are working tirelessly in the field of childcare. And finally, I just wanted to mention that the live transcription function has been turned on. You will also see that at the bottom of your screen, and it'll be a CC or live transcript. It does have to be enabled. So for those of you who are looking for that, it's just there at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. Okay, so now on to our first speaker. So I'd like to introduce Emily Gullig, Chair of the Early Childhood Educators of BC. Emily is the Executive Director of the Early Childhood Educators of British Columbia, and she took on the position in 2010 when she moved from Prince Rupert to Vancouver. She is a licensed early childhood educator and has been in the field for over 20 years with certification in both special needs and First Nations perspectives in early childhood settings. Throughout her career, she has always been engaged in highlighting the specialty and importance of early childhood educator professionals and the sector as a whole. And Emily, we are very grateful to have you join us this evening.
Thank you so much. And I think I need to update my bio a little bit because I'm actually celebrating my 30 years as an early childhood educator this year. And it really is an honor to be here tonight with you to share and to learn. And even within my 30 years, I know every time we have one of these conversations, I'm always learning something and willing to learn and grow in my own practice. So I'm joining today from my home from the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And ECBC, or the Early Childhood Educators of British Columbia, for 53 years has been dedicated to building respect and understanding of the early childhood education and educators. Our work has always involved looking at moving this critical profession forward. The unique and strong partnership that ECBC has with the Coalition of Childcare Advocates was actually formalized, I would say, in 2010 when we came together in those first discussions, those first few meetings about developing an actual plan, a solution, a concrete solution, a bold ambition solution to the childcare crisis that was happening here in British Columbia. The 10-a-day plan was born to us and has moved us forward in ways that we probably never even imagined. And I talked to many of our founding members of ECBC from 53 years ago, and they send me messages almost weekly just to tell me about how excited they are to see this profession having a chance to be recognized for the unique work that we actually do. So both our organizations are fully committed to the calls to the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation document. We fully support and respect the Indigenous people's rights to design, develop, govern, and develop the programs that will meet their needs within their own communities with their leadership. So tonight, I'm really excited to listen, to learn more as we move forward, and look forward for the days and the months ahead as we move this incredible plan forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And 30 years, wow, what an impressive career. And I must say, you know, I've only been doing this work for maybe 10 in this area, and I've learned so much from all of you about the tireless advocacy that you've been leading, and the cusp of change that we're on. Actually, we're feeling it and across our province, and it's really just so inspiring. And so that is a good segue to introduce my next guest, Sharon Gregson. Sharon Gregson is a spokesperson for the $10 a day childcare campaign. She's works with the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of British Columbia, and she's also represents British Columbia on the board of Childcare Advocacy Association of Canada. She's a twice elected trustee to the Vancouver Board of Education and has spent several decades working directly in the childcare sector. And I have to say, when Sharon and I started working together about 6-7 months ago, I was on a maternity leave with my second, and Sharon always had her grandson with her in these calls. And so we were talking through a lot of this work, but there was always children around in the background. And so it's just a testament to how much lived experience you have, in addition to the amazing professional experience you bring to this movement that we're now all benefiting from. So without further ado, Sharon, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chantal. What a pleasure to be here tonight with people from across the province. And thank you, Nadine, for that very lovely opening, and to Emily for being here. So I will just jump right in and walk through a PowerPoint this evening. I'm joining you from my home office on the unceded beautiful territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I feel very privileged to be able to connect with you all this evening. So thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to do that big technological jump and share my screen. Okay, and thumbs up, Chantal, is that everything's looking good? Okay. So here we are. You're here for a presentation on the 2022 roadmap to 10-a-day childcare in British Columbia. And if you're joining us, you've got some interest in this subject matter. So it might be that you're a parent or a grandparent, you're an educator, you're a provider, you're an employer who wants to have childcare for the people who are working in your business. You care about this issue, and so we care too, and we're happy to tell you what's happening in the province. So as Emily said, the 10-a-day plan itself was released in 2011. The Coalition of Childcare Advocates and the Early Childhood Educators of BC, and as Emily shared, full support from both our organizations for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit rights and jurisdiction, and our clear understanding that it's Indigenous communities, Indigenous parents who know what is best for Indigenous children. And so this 10-a-day plan might not be the plan that Indigenous communities want to adopt, and we fully support their rights, and we'll learn from them as they develop and deliver services that meet the needs of their communities and families. And we recognize you just have to turn on the 6 o'clock news. These are challenging times, and they don't seem to be getting any calmer out there. We look what's happening in Europe. Challenging times for families, educators, and childcare providers, the climate emergencies that are happening. And interestingly, the Coalition of Childcare Advocates and ECEBC are just about to release a policy note that speaks to the links, the 5 intersections that we've identified between childcare and the environment and climate change. So look for that coming soon. We're all aware of the inequities, inequalities that are facing so many families and communities in our country, and the pandemic. What can we say about 2 years of living with COVID-19? But what it has shown us is that quality childcare is essential. And throughout all these challenges, we know, and we're very clear that childcare is part of the solution. So what is the 10-a-day plan? For some of you, this will be old hat. For some of you, you might have heard of 10-a-day, but not really know that it's about more than just families paying $10 a day. It's about welcoming in families in all their diversity and about the rights of children to access high quality, publicly funded childcare. The 10-a-day system is about respect for educators with fair compensation, and that means a provincial wage grid and access to credentials. The 10-a-day system is about accountability for using taxpayer dollars wisely and welcoming in licensed nonprofit, for-profit centers, as well as home-based, multi-age and family programs, not thinking that one size fits all. And all these things together, the 10-a-day system recognizes all these things together advance a sustainable economy. So what does it look like out there right now? Well, there is no question for those of us, as Emily's been in the field 30 years, many people on this call will have been involved with childcare for a long time. There is unprecedented government commitment now, both provincially and federally, and in some cases local government, to $10 a day system building. And there is public support like never before. In fact, let's say it's public expectations around bold action and recognition that 10-a-day is life-changing. For families that are in $10 a day programs already, it's an actual quote to say that it's life-changing. So we have seen measurable progress in our province, particularly from 2018 to 2020. We've seen government invest in lower fees for families, higher wages for early childhood educators, and funding for more spaces. And this really culminated just 2 days ago on Tuesday. And the province released its budget for the next fiscal year, 2022 to 2023. And the spending in that year will be over $1.2 billion. This has never happened in our province before. At the same time, though, that we've been making progress, we've seen a significant growth of for-profit centers. And what that has meant is, when the stats are looked at, is that those programs have fees that are on average, 20 to 60% higher than the nonprofit sectors. That's something that we are very aware of. And anybody who's involved in childcare at all knows that there is a massive recruitment and retention issue for educators. It's the biggest challenge now for the sector expanding. So the roadmap builds on the progress that is being made and really looks to the future to ensure that the public funds, now $1.2 billion next year, ensures that public funds are going to be spent in a way in our province that serves the public good and builds public assets and a public system with those taxpayer dollars. Speaking of taxpayer dollars, it was last summer that the Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, came to Vancouver, to Coquitlam actually, and actually it was Trudeau who came. I think she made the announcement, but it was Trudeau who came and stood with Premier Horgan and made an announcement of $3.2 billion in a bilateral agreement. Federal dollars coming to British Columbia. BC was the first jurisdiction to sign, to accept this federal money. And it's significant. So this agreement covers children birth to 5 years old. So not school age, and we'll talk about that later. And it means that by December of this year, so not some far off date, but December of this year, average fees in our province will be reduced by 50%. So that average is going to be about $20 a day for childcare. And it also commits to expanding the number of 10-a-day spaces to over 12,000 by the end of this year. So really important to note those things, and we'll talk more about those in the next few slides. And then by March 2026, again, that's just about 4 years away, there's a commitment to have fees at 10 a day across the province, to develop an ECE wage grid, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, because notice it says develop, not implement. There's a commitment to Indigenous childcare and to the creation or funding of 30,000 new nonprofit and public spaces. So we use the word unprecedented a lot, but this really is unprecedented investment into childcare in our province. So let's look first of all for parents that are listening about affordability. And there's that 50% average fee reduction by December of this year that I mentioned, which is about $20 a day. And at the same time, we've got more programs that are going to be converting to $10 a day. So first of all, a little bit more about this 50% average fee reduction. So it wasn't something that the advocates had actually recommended. It was something that the federal and provincial governments negotiated, but now it's here. What does it mean? Well, it's, as I said, from birth to 5 in full day programs, fees will be reduced to the average of 20 a day, and it'll be through something called the Childcare Fee Reduction Initiative. And that's a stream of funding that childcare providers already use, most providers in the province. So it isn't going to be new paperwork for providers. It's a stream of funding they're already familiar with, but it will mean new accountability, we expect, because of course it's significant new taxpayer dollars, public funds. So we want to make sure that the funds are used in a way that they're intended to be used to reduce parent fees. And for families listening, don't worry, you don't have to apply for this fee reduction. It's the childcare providers who will choose to participate in this new, in the $20 a day average fee reduction. So for families, you'll be talking to your providers about their choice to participate. And then simultaneously, the provincial government is committed and this federal funding to bring $10 a day childcare to more families. So for the last few years, there have been only about 2,500 10-a-day spaces across the province, but they've been a huge success. And government's own review of those spaces found stats that said 98% of families in those programs reported reduced financial stress. 96% reported improved well-being. 93% reported that they had more ability to save money and pay off debt. 85% reported they had improved work-life balance. So not just investing in childcare, but really investing in families who are accessing 10 a day. So last year, the provincial government opened up an application process and asked more programs, do you want to be a 10 a day site? And they had a huge response. So over the next month or two, by April, we expect another 4,000 10 a day spaces will be announced. And by the end of the year, another 6,000 for a total of 12,500 10 a day spaces by the end of 2022. But our suggestion to government is that they move away from just this application process where existing providers have to apply to become a 10 a day site. And instead, government starts to plan the transition of existing public and nonprofit and interested Indigenous programs to 10 a day. And that when the provincial government is providing taxpayer dollars to open new sites, that those new sites open as 10 a day sites. And we know that for-profit private operators have questions about how they'll participate in the 10 a day system. And so we have suggested to government some options, and we're encouraging government to explore those options on how they can work with private facility owners to support their participation in the 10 a day system. The 10 a day plan has always said that we suggest government welcomes in all providers on a level playing field. Oh, here we go. So I think I've missed a slide. So school age is an important part of the services that families need to access, but the bilateral does not include school age care. That's now solely the responsibility of the provincial government to fund. And we know that the province made a commitment in the last election to universal access to before and after school care on school grounds. And they have been expanding something called the Seamless Day. You might have heard about that. That is school-age care that happens right in the elementary school provided by the school district. Those are early childhood educators who would be working in a kindergarten classroom, open the classroom up earlier in the morning, 7:30, to welcome in children before school. And then that educator stays in the classroom as a professional colleague with the teacher to support the children during the morning. That educator would leave, that early childhood educator would leave at lunchtime, and a second educator arrive in the afternoon to support the children and stay when the teacher leaves at 3 o'clock until the end of the day. Quick sip of my coffee, excuse me. The other model in school age care is extended day, which more people are familiar with, which is the before and after school pieces of the day that are, excuse me, that are support school age children. So more seamless day is happening across the province. And we heard in the budget on Tuesday that seamless day is expanding, I think now to 44 school districts. We also saw in the budget that there's a commitment to reduce school age fees in September next year, September 2023, by 50% or $20 a day or less. And so we really had hoped that that would be happening in this year, but there is now a commitment to school age fee reduction in September next year. And in the bilateral agreement, there's also a commitment to expanding childcare through modular buildings. And that's something we've recommended to government for quite a long time. But there needs to be far more attention paid to the education and the wage rates of those educators who are working in school age care. We're recommending that there be a learning framework for 9 to 12-year-olds. There's already one for younger children. And we know that school districts can't be setting up school age care to compete with existing school age childcare providers. So there has to be engagement with existing on-site and off-site programs. And frankly, we need more classrooms across the province to be licensed for school age care, particularly kindergarten classrooms. So that's the affordability piece, but we really need to talk about quality, because there's no sense government investing $1.2 billion next year in childcare if it isn't going to be quality for children. And quality childcare isn't just about making childcare so that parents can participate in the workforce. It's also about making sure it's quality for children. And to do that, government is committed to ensuring that early childhood educators are a well-supported profession. And that's something that's been central to the 10-at-8 plan. So our position is that all government actions must move towards the credentials and professionalization of the sector, just the same way we expect teachers in our elementary schools and nurses in our hospitals to have credentials and be professionals. And to that end, just about a week ago, government announced $4.9 million in additional investments into the ECE workforce, so into ECE professionals, through bursaries and professional development opportunities for more post-secondary seats, which is all good news. But what is really missing is the provincial competitive wage grid for early childhood educators. The bilateral, as I mentioned, commits to developing that wage grid, but we need to see it be more than just developed. It needs to be implemented. Our two organizations released in 2020 a wage grid report, and we suggested now in nearly 2 years ago that early childhood educators should have a starting wage of $26 an hour, and infant, toddler, and special needs educators a starting wage of $29 an hour. And of course, those rates would need to go up from there. So we're calling for improved access to educational standards and public post-secondary colleges and universities, and a transition strategy with student loan relief for early childhood educators, dual credit for advanced placement for high school students who want to become professional early childhood educators, and laddering for people who have credentials that would be applicable to the ECE credential. And importantly, we're calling for people who work in the sector to have membership in ECE BC, the Early Childhood Educators of BC. just as professionals who are architects, for example, teachers, engineers, they're all members of their professional association too. So we think it's applicable in childcare. So there is a $4 an hour wage enhancement. $2 of it has been paid out for a couple of years. And as of March 31st, the final $2 will be paid out. And as of April, more early childhood educators will be eligible to receive that wage enhancement. That's people who work in supported child development and people who work in administration in childcare programs. So some good news, but lots more work to do there. Excuse me, one quick sip. Okay, so you may have heard in the news, childcare is moving out of the Ministry for Children and Family Development and into the Ministry of Education. That's where it belongs, and we're really pleased about that. It's something we've been recommending for 11 years. So we do, though, stress that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples should still and have the rights and jurisdiction to determine the governance and delivery of their own services. We've heard from government, it's not something we recommended, but it's happening. There are 6 regional centers being developed, 6 early years childcare regional centers. And we're seeing this as a transition step, supporting the childcare sector and its uniqueness and in its strengths to be a strong and equal partner with school districts as school districts build their capacity to take on childcare. And that strong and equal partnership is based on the BC Early Learning Framework, which is for children from birth to 8 years old. That's and the new learning framework for 9 to 12-year-olds that I mentioned. Those are strengths of the 2 sectors working together. There needs to be dialogue between early childhood educators and primary teachers. And we know that these regional centers will require childcare expertise to be embedded in them to be successful. So government is expanding the public delivery of licensed childcare through the Seamless Day that I mentioned, that's school-age childcare delivered by school districts. And now school districts are also involved in a program called Just Before, and it's expanding across the province. And that's like a preschool inside schools where the early childhood educators are staff of the school district. It's a part-day program, and our hope is that expands to start to meet the needs of full day attendance. So we'll be watching those 2 programs, and we'll be curious about how they develop. So we've talked about affordability, we've talked about quality. Now let's talk about accessibility, because it's no good having quality, affordable childcare if not enough people can access it. So the big part of the bilateral announcement is funding for 30,000 new nonprofit, public, and Indigenous spaces over the next 4 years by March 2026. And I say nonprofit, public, Indigenous because this is public money, taxpayer dollars, that's being used to build this public system. And we know that these spaces need not just to be Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. They need to meet the diversity of families across the province. And that means people who work shift work, people who need part-time care, flexible care, extended hours care. And we know that the way to achieve these new spaces is not just by waiting for people to apply for money, because then it's the people who've got the capacity to actually do that paperwork. We don't do that with our schools or hospitals or libraries, and so we shouldn't be doing that with childcare either. We need to think about public planning, public projects for childcare, and replacing the grants with an actual capital budget in the Ministry of Education, so that we move away from the ad hoc expansion that we have now to really planning where we need childcare developed and making sure it happens. So that means expanding nonprofit facilities with public money and making sure there are dedicated funds for Indigenous governments and Indigenous nonprofit organizations. So that's the affordability and the quality and the accessibility, but what brings it all together into a system? And so in our roadmap, and I hope you'll all have time at some point over the next little while to go onto the Tenaday website and look at the roadmap, we really think about these 4 building blocks as the glue that brings these the affordability, quality, and accessibility together into a system. So what do the nuts and bolts of what a system needs? Well, there needs to be a funding formula that integrates educators' compensation with lower parent fees, with quality programming, and with accountability measures back to taxpayers. So a funding formula that works across the province, perhaps with regional differences, but really starts to build the system. There needs to be common policies and procedures. So how do we think about inclusion across the province? How do we think about how waiting lists are dealt with and enrollment? How do we think about health and safety protocols? And when we're thinking about significant new public money being spent, we want to make sure that there's quality, that public investment is building that quality system for the public good. And so we want to make sure there's some commonalities that are happening. And of course, there's also always going to be uniqueness in childcare, and we want that to continue, but we also know that there's some basics that we want to make sure happen. And we know that we can't continue to have childcare as just individual silos working independently without a lot of supports. We know that there's much more strength in community and neighborhood networks and collaboration, perhaps by elementary school, neighborhood catchment areas, where there's collaboration on things like professional development between providers, maybe on bulk buying, where there's much more connection between providers. And importantly, we're thinking about partnership agreements. Right now, childcare works primarily just on a contract with the government for a little bit of provincial funding. Childcare that's in schools, they just are like have a landlord-tenant relationship with the school. So we really want to move away from that kind of relationship to one that is built on reciprocal benefits and responsibilities. So responsibilities and roles would be spelled out between childcare providers and school districts. Maybe there'd be an associate superintendent in each school district that's responsible for childcare and early learning. And maybe these partnership agreements would spell out how professional development and the early learning frameworks are used. So there's a lot of growth that can happen to move away from just a contract as childcare moves into the Ministry of Education and a different kind of relationship with government. So what's happening next? Well, as I said, we've got a huge amount of money from the bilateral agreement. There's 1.2 billion in the provincial budget for next year. These are enough dollars to make a difference for families, for educators. This is significant. So let's ensure that these dollars are spent to build a system that BC needs, so that when Chantal's children, when my grandchildren have their own families, that there's a system that families can rely on, and it not just be a matter of luck if you're lucky enough to get a space or lucky enough to be able to afford it. Let's actually have a system for the next generation that looks better than it's looked up until now. And that's going to take some bold action, particularly on recruitment and retention. And we're suggesting that governments start with those who are ready. Programs, organizations that are ready to transition to become a 10-a-day site. And they'll be learning as we go. This is a brand new system. We're going to not expect that everything's going to be perfect, but we do expect to learn from other jurisdictions, expect to learn from other places where childcare is further ahead than it is here, and for BC to learn as we go. But 10-a-day is the plan, and it's the roadmap, and we're glad to have now the support of many, many people across British Columbia, representing well over 2 million British Columbians when we look at the list of supporters. So how can you help get to 10-a-day in our province? Well, after this webinar, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with some information about how you can take some action, perhaps contact your local politicians, how you can talk to your local provider, your employer, your colleagues about 10-a-day. There are government engagement sessions, which one of my colleagues might put in the chat for how you can have your voice heard when speaking directly to government. You could join the Coalition of Childcare Advocates. I'll put in a plug for joining our organization, because together we can make sure that BC has the childcare system that we want and need in our province. And I always like to end on this slide with some fabulous people from Collingwood Neighbourhood House, and encourage you, if you have your smartphone with you, to bring it out and text the word "sign" to this number, and that will make sure that you have signed the 10-a-day plan. So we'd be really pleased to have you do that. And I think that's the end of the presentation, Chantal. So I'm going to close down and stop sharing. People have taken note of that number.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon, for that. And wow, I mean, so much thought has gone into this, so much work. And, you know, like we've said, the incremental and tireless and evidence-based approach that you've all taken to building this roadmap, it's truly an inspiration. And I just have to share a quick story. You know, a friend of mine found out, she has 2 young children, much like myself, found out that her childcare was going to a $10 a day site, and so moving from, you know, upwards of $2,500 or $2,200 for the 2 children to just over $400. And you think about what you can do. You know, she talked about the possibilities that creates and the investments that you can make back into your child's long-term education, your family, your overall family affordability. So it is truly life-changing, and we're all so grateful for this incredible work. I've seen a very great and robust chat taking place. I noticed theme, couple of questions that have already been asked and answered, which is great. Some resources posted in the chat, but I did notice a theme specifically around preschools and not seeing reference to the type of care in the $10 a day plan. And I think just fears generally about what might happen to that model of care as this becomes implemented. And Sharon, I know you spoke to that a little bit in your presentation, but perhaps someone can, you know, whether it's you or someone else, can just speak to that more specifically, just to offer a little bit of perspective on what that could look like going forward.
Maybe I'll just jump in quickly and just answer about preschool, because it is it was in the provincial budget 2 days ago, to say that as of September 2023, the fees in preschool will be reduced, as well as in school age care. And when I use the word preschool, I'm talking specifically about the part of a week, part of a day kind of care. So sometimes that's Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, mornings, or Tuesday, Thursday afternoons. That's what we mean when we use the term preschool. And so, yes, we are expecting that the province will be reducing fees for that model of care, that licensed care, next year.
Great, thank you. I think that answers the question. The other, I saw a lot of questions in around the sort of seamless care piece, the seamless model and the sort of before and after school and the different licensing that has been implemented to support that. And I just have to share, you know, at KidSafe, my organization that I work at, we do some after school care. It's really ad hoc, and it's really because the Vancouver School Board has asked us to do it, and we see the dire need, but this is a huge gap. And so it's great to see that kind of systematic approach and the resources put into building that out more broadly. Back to the Q&A. As current $10 a day site, our preschool is already funded at $7 a day. That comes from Charlene. I see a lot of questions, which is great. I see some questions around when are brand new centers expected to be part of the $10 a day plan. Sharon and, you know, or the rest, I know that you talked a little bit about the numbers of sites coming in just within the next 6 months, the 4,000 and then an additional 6,000. I guess the $1 million question that a lot of parents are wondering is, how are those selected, and what's the process in which your site might become a $10 a day site? And I'm sure that there's, you know, demographic mapping that takes place, but if you have any insight into that, that would be wonderful to hear and learn more about.
Vanella, were you going to jump in there?
I Actually, I was just responding to somebody else, so if that's okay,
All right, sure. I'll jump in just to say, well, we know that government did have criteria for programs that we're going to convert to become a 10-a-day site. And we also know that they had a massive number of applications of programs across the province that wanted to become and do want to become 10-a-day sites. And we understand that there will be some effort to look at, and of course, we're not the decision makers, we're not government, we're just the advocates pushing from the outside. But we understand they're looking at some geography to make sure that the 10-a-day is truly across the province. And I understand that they were particularly looking at infant toddler sites. And so our fingers are crossed that a lot of parents will be happy when these announcements are made. And probably I would say it's the number one question that we receive is from parents is when will my program become a 10-a-day site? How can I make sure my program becomes a 10-a-day site? How can I find a 10-a-day site? It is really the expectation of families now that this is what they want and what they expect.
And that's great. I think that also demonstrates the power of collective advocacy, and that this is becoming more and more status quo, hopefully, and it's definitely in our common language in the media and amongst many of us. So that's great that those expectations, because that's how that's how we can also add that little pressure to government that's required to ensure that this continues to build and work off of this momentum. I did see a couple of questions around the workforce, the attracting and retaining of early childhood educator professionals, and of course, dealing with the labor skills gap that I think lots of sectors are facing. I'm just curious around, are there discussions that you're aware of or happening with post-secondary institutions to expand the training and the qualifications that are being offered at these institutions across the province or potentially online? Like, what are you actually seeing in terms of a response from the field to engage this of professionals?
Well, we are very fortunate to have Emily Golick on the call with us, who is the point person in the province for early childhood educators. So I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit about what's happening for early childhood educators.
Thanks, Sharon. I think there is a lot happening for early childhood educators in currently, and our expectations that more will happen, particularly around recruitment and retention. So as the professional organization, we will be releasing next week our vision of the role of early childhood educators within this province, and how our pedagogy does become part of the conversation and how that rolls out. And we are looking at, so we're happy to report that there has been additional funding around to extend our education by government providing resources for bursaries is one key way that government has addressed the education piece. There's other opportunities to, if we're talking about quality in that sense, about really getting deep into the work of early childhood education, particularly with the Early Years Pedagogy Network. There's opportunities with other professional development, looking at our ethics as a profession. There's multiple, there's close to, I think it's about 12 initiatives that are rolling out, and we would expect government to continue the building of that and have this as part of the system going forward. So we're not looking at one-offs, we're looking at something that's embedded into a system that looks at the work of early childhood educators. The importance of that is with children, with families and communities, and then also looking at how does this support us as a profession to want to be here and stay in our profession, that even goes beyond the wages and the working conditions. Of course, we know that's key. That's probably the number one thing, But there's much more when you take this on as a career to keep you motivated, to keep you connected, to keep you feeling good within the community. So we are happy to see what's happening, and we will continually push and advocate for more opportunities for early childhood educators to come into their own, so people see the value of early childhood education as being key in communities for the good of society.
And Emily, I'll just add as well that we are relentless in pushing for that competitive provincial wage grid. We know that wages are only part of the overall compensation that early childhood educators and educators working with in the sector need to receive. But we are very focused on making sure that that is the next step that government takes, is to move away from the wage enhancements into a wage grid. And we can learn from Aboriginal Head Start, for example, that have already made some moves around investing in wages, and we'll continue to do that, as well as advocates working with ECEBC.
Thank you, Emily and Sharon, for that. And I have to say, from a gender equality and gender equity perspective, we know that so much of this workforce so many of them are women and self-identified women. And likewise, it's many mothers do end up taking that step back, whether it is in their professional careers when they do have young children because of challenges with childcare. So the intersectional benefits of a universal system go far and wide, and that is one of them. And it's just so wonderful to see this actually being implemented and making a real difference for women all over the province. Another question that we have here is, will the plan be available to every child or international families that are temporary residents, or will they have this as a right as well?
If it's up to us, then yes, absolutely. We don't anticipate that that there will be gatekeeping at the door of the childcare program. That if children are enrolled, they would be eligible to receive maximum care of a maximum of $10 a day. Again, we're not government, but we certainly would not be putting up those kind of barriers for children to access quality, affordable childcare.
Yeah, and I think the more centers that are 10 a day that are developed across the province in community, the more that local residents will be able to access these services within their own community. And so hopefully that, you spoke earlier to accessibility, hopefully that creates more of a equitable approach to also who's benefiting from this system. We have a question, hi from Richmond. Nikki Byers is asking, can we talk about what accountability for funding looks like?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, but you might all be tired of me talking. I don't know if Linnell wanted to jump in or Rita. I can always talk about accountability, though. I'm happy to do that.
Hi, Sharon. I'm happy to start off that conversation, and thanks, Nikki. So we've been talking about and recommending in 10 a day some standard accountability measures for quite some time now, and they really focus on, first of all, ensuring that the public funds are used to lower parent fees to a maximum of 10 a day. And maybe I can add in a little bit of answer a few other parts of a question in talking about this, because people have been asking if there's an income test around that 10 a day, and 10 a day is the maximum for all families, and lower income families would pay less than 10 a day. So it would be could be no fees for lower income. It is no fees for lower income families, and a subsidy to cover the difference there. So 10 a day maximum for full day, $7 a day maximum for part day. And as I say, no fees for families earning less than $45,000 is the current limit. So that's the first accountability requirement. Secondly, and we've been talking, Emily and Sharon, about the wage grid. So secondly, the funding needs to be used to pay educators according to a provincial wage grid. And thirdly, very critically, is to ensure that all families are welcome, that there is full inclusion. of all families, and fourthly, that the program follows and is consistent with and guided by the early learning framework. Those are the key ones that come to mind. And Sharon, there's a fifth that I'm missing right here, so I'll turn it back.
I think you covered off well. I mean, when we're talking about accountability, we're talking about accountability for substantial public funds to use that money in the way it's intended to operate a quality program where fees are no more than 10 a day and educators are well compensated. So with a funding formula that includes human resources, of course, that's about 80% of funding that would be received, includes facility operating expenses, administration expenses, and of course, the all important programming for children. So accountability around the funding that you receive to deliver that quality program.
Great, thank you. One of the questions, I haven't seen it here, but it's certainly something I've heard from colleagues and parents alike, is building this system is robust, as we've seen in your presentation, and it's taken a lot of time. How vulnerable or susceptible is it when we have changes in the government of the day? You know, right now we are in this window of time where we have that alignment federally, provincially, and even you shared municipally. So is it sustainable beyond that? And what kind of work is being done to ensure that sort of longevity and stability of such a system?
Well, that is a great question. And if we think about grade 2, if we had a change of government, or when in sometime in the future there's a change of government, we all know that the new government would not be able to say, we've decided we're not going to fund grade 2 anymore. Grade 2 is not going to be part of what we consider to be publicly provided education anymore. Parents would be understandably livid, and teachers would say that that's a ridiculous thing. You can't take grade 2 out of the equation. And so we need to start thinking about early childhood education and childcare as part of that stable public system in the same way. And that will only happen when enough families actually get to experience quality, affordable childcare, so that they know what they want to hang on to and fight for, and what they want for their friends and neighbors. And so that's why we say government can't drag this out too long. They need the bold and decisive action, so that we get enough spaces that are affordable, that we invest in educators to work in these programs, so that families can rely on them and can expect them, and then people will fight to retain them. And so Quebec has started a childcare system in 1998. It's not perfect, and we can learn from it, but it is very well entrenched in Quebec. It needs to grow further, just like ours will. It's going to happen over time, but government needs to act boldly to make sure that this happens quickly in our province.
And do you think moving that into the Ministry of Education helps with that piece of work?
Absolutely. When we think about our K-12 system, we know that doesn't matter where you live in British Columbia, it doesn't matter how much money your parents have. If you're 8 years old, you get to go to grade 3. And that's an expectation. And whether or not you have children, you understand that it makes sense that we have a good education system. So we need to think about childcare the same way, that it's part of our continuum of lifelong learning, care and learning. It's good for society. It's a public good. So yes, a move to the Ministry of Education makes perfect sense.
Right. I see a question here from Saya and Brent. How easy is it for private daycare providers to apply and receive 10-a-day funding? As well, what is the approval rate for applying for childcare centers? And Rita, I believe you might be able to speak to this one.
Sure. Well, I was just trying to type in the chat, so sort of a couple of points to that. And a couple of questions around how do we apply. So There isn't currently a process that government has established by which anyone, any program, regardless of how or where it's run, can apply to be a 10-a-day program. Rather, there have been a couple of times when government has announced that they are going to fund more 10-a-day programs, and they often establish priorities, and they put up an application form, and then interested programs can apply to be a 10-a-day, and then government adjudicates those and announces who they've selected to be 10-a-day. So we've only had a couple of rounds of that kind of process to establish 10-a-day programs. And as Sharon said in her presentation, there is one currently going on. We expect that in the next couple of months, right, Sharon, we'll hear about another 4,000 spaces in programs that have been deemed to be 10-a-day. So I want to be clear that there isn't, nobody right now can just apply to be a 10-a-day program. But, and that's government's decision. Of course, what we're recommending is that rather than that reactive kind of competitive process, that government actually plan out the transition of programs, looking at communities of high need, looking at programs that are ready and willing to implement the accountability measures, and learn as we go, both from the childcare sector and from government, as 10-a-day rolls out to more and more programs. So there's been a couple of questions sort of that seem to suggest that people have the impression that they just haven't seen the application form to be a 10-a-day program, and there isn't such a process at the moment. Government may put out another call, so you want to keep watching their website if you're interested, but that's not the process. And on the other question, so, we're certainly not in a position to say how easy or not it is. I will say that in the first round of what were called 10-a-day prototypes, now called 10-a-day sites, the first programs that government funded to be 10-a-day, there are for-profit programs that are included in that. And as we've said in the chat, and Linnell has posted earlier on a link to a briefing piece, the 10-a-day plan welcomes in all providers who want to be part of the new system and who are prepared to be accountable for the public funds that they receive. So maybe Linnell, you can repost that link in the chat to our piece on what does 10-a-day mean for my business. So I hope maybe that's answered some of the questions.
Fabulous. Rita, thank you so much. And we are just coming to the end of our time. So it's sad. I feel like we could have this conversation for a long time. And I think what this tells me and many of us is that this maybe might be the first of a few of these discussions as the news and the work evolves. So to that end, I just want to thank everybody here for attending and for taking the time this evening to be with us and to listen from the experts in the field that are doing this work, but also to everyone that has advocated for this system and that has been part of the coalition and that has supported the movement building of this work. This kind of work is incremental and hard, and the payoff is significant. And so we're just so grateful to Linnell, Rita, Emily, Sharon, and so many more of you that are here that have been part of this. So thanks so much. A few things to let you know is an email will be sent to everyone that's registered with this recording. So you will all be able to see this again, and also a link to further information talking about action and the BC budget information. 10aday.ca, there's lots of information that you can get from there as well, with the links to the roadmaps, as well as wonderful Q&As that I personally have found very useful, that just have a lot more detail in terms of how and where this might roll out. Sharon, Linnell, I know the 10-a-day folks very active on social media as well, so please look them up on Twitter and Facebook for sort of up-to-the-minute updates and live updates. And with that, and if you look in the chat, there's a link that Sharon has just posted to the website as well to join the coalition and become a member, and then you'll receive information as it's coming out. So with that, I just want to thank everybody again for attending, and thanks to all of our panelists and our speakers and our attendees. This has been a wonderful discussion, and this event is adjourned. Thank you very much.